Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining GFI's first ever LINC seminar. LINC stands for Learn, Inspire, Network, and Collaborate. My name is Marika Azoff, and I am GFI's Corporate Engagement Specialist here in the US. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. We are recording this seminar, and everyone who's registered will receive an email after today's seminar with the link to the recording, along with a feedback survey after the seminar. We really want to make sure that these quarterly sessions are as useful to you as possible, so we deeply appreciate you taking a minute or two to provide your honest feedback. You can see today's agenda here on the screen next to me. Our seminar will be an hour long, followed by a 30-minute networking session on the platform MeetAway. For those of you who haven't used MeetAway, it's super simple. It's a great platform. You've all been pre-registered for the networking session. So if you'd like to attend, which I sincerely hope that you do, at the end of the hour, we will just send you a link. You'll click on that and it will take you right to MeetAway. And I'll share a little bit more at the end, share a few more directions. So in addition to our fabulous panelists, we're also joined today by my fellow GFI colleagues. We have Carlotta Lucas, who's GFI Europe's Corporate Engagement Manager, and Molly O'Donnell, GFI US's Corporate Engagement Coordinator. You'll hear from both of them at various points throughout the seminar. Now, before I pass it over to our keynote speaker, I'd like to just briefly share a little bit about our impetus for launching this initiative. So over the years, GFI has received feedback from the various stakeholders that our team interacts with, including food manufacturers and upstream supply chain companies. We've heard that there's really a desire for more opportunities to connect and collaborate with other companies in the space. So while one-on-one introductions can be made, we wanted to provide a space for industry stakeholders such as yourselves to really convene, to learn together, to network, and to collaborate. So these LINC seminars will occur once a quarter, and each session will be dedicated to a specific topic that our research has indicated is critical to addressing industry bottlenecks and to accelerating the growth of the alt protein sector. So our goals for this initiative are to align and focus as an industry on the top priorities for achieving the long-term success of alternative proteins. Our goals are to drive outcome-oriented conversations between members of this initiative that really address the main barriers to alternative proteins. And we hope to facilitate new partnerships and alliances along the value chain. So this community is founded upon the belief that by convening a diverse range of stakeholders, we can drive industry-wide change and grow the entire sector in a way that benefits all. So now I'm incredibly excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Feike Sibesma, who will be speaking about the importance of cross-industry collaboration. Feike wears many hats. He's an honorary chairman at Royal DSM. He's on the board of Unilever. He's a World Bank climate leader, on the board of the World Economic Forum. And he's an advisory board member at the International Monetary Fund. So Feike, thank you so much for joining us today. I will let you take it from here.
Thank you very much, Marika. Thank you very much to GFI for inviting me for this session and for all of you joining. I have been CEO of Royal DSM for the last 14 years, and now switching off, I indeed wear multiple hats, but all my activities are centered around climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and about hunger and food. And especially in Africa, I founded also a project I'm heavily involved in, Africa Improved Foods, food and climate, and those are interrelated. I really love the GFI approach, Good Food Institute, and the LINC initiative, learn, inspire each other, network, and collaborate. And I think we need that LINC approach of GFI. Now, maybe we would like to have a great start and a great conversation, but let me start, if I may, with a little bit depressed view, which makes the urgency and the importance of GFI only more relevant. What about our food system? Is it working? We achieved a lot of good things over the last decades. but is it a little bit broken also? And sometimes you can delete a little bit and quite a bit. If we eat and do not eat healthy, many people, and become obese or diabetes or other things due to our eating habits and our food composition, is the food system not a little bit broken? If climate change is to a large degree triggered by the way we manufacture and make our food, and not only by the cows and the meat emissions, but also, for example, in the Netherlands or Europe, when you eat a steak, and by the way, you should do that much, much less or not. But if you do so, an average steak has traveled 8,000 kilometers before it comes to your dish. And we even can afford that as a society. Is that not ridiculous to a certain degree that we have orchestrated like that, talking about climate? Next to health and climate, is the food system also not a little bit broken if we throw away 30 to 50% of all the food that we have? Can we not say it's broken a little bit? And on top of that, if 1 billion people, and I visited those countries in Somalia, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Swaziland, Zambia, a lot of times with the World Food Programme, 1 billion people go to bed hungry. They don't know whether the next day their children will die or survive. 1 billion people live like that, where we throw away 30 to 50% of our food. So having said so, sorry for starting in such a depressed way, and I'm an optimistic person and we can do better, but I also would like to say we need to do better because we have to improve. And for me, the way the average Western person in the US, but also in Europe, are eating meat cannot continue in the whole world. And therefore, alternative proteins from a climate perspective, from an availability perspective, from a health perspective, is very, very relevant. And of course, we can do more than alternative proteins. Like DSM developed a new ingredient which reduces the methane emissions if you put it in the feed with 30%. Also, that would be helpful. All those kind of things and innovations can be helpful. By the way, interesting. Farmers do not want to pay, do not want to buy. Feed companies do not want to buy. Why not? Because farmers are exempted. Exempted from what? From CO2 trading and emission payments. Okay, did Mother Planet exempted farmers? Mother Planet exempted nobody. It's legislation who exempted something. Is that not weird to a certain degree? That we as mankind, from a legislation perspective, just exempt certain emissions. And therefore, I think the development, which we do with CFI of the alternative protein sector, is very important. And that can be plant-based, that can be fermentation-based, like fungi, which several companies are doing, or algae, like several companies are doing, or cultivated meat, like several companies are doing. It's difficult to predict which technology will be winning, maybe none, maybe there's room for all those technologies. And I sometimes help those companies not to compete with each other, but to collaborate with each other. Because I say, don't compete on this tiny little niche you have developed so far, because you collectively compete with the big giant meat markets and don't start to compete. What I do now for a living is very much help this sector. Sometimes we think that they can get access to money or advices or help or technology or how they can grow their market. And especially, and this fits very much with DFI and LINC, by collaborating with each other. I think, by the way, we need much more money. And the last couple of years, there were a lot of investments. But today, with the developments on the stock exchange, you see that some companies have difficulties raising the money in this field. And I would like to use my knowledge, context, power, so to say, to take care that this sector has enough money, that we can develop the right products with the right taste and the right composition but also at the right price that many people can afford. And if I think, for example, on Africa and Bangladesh, I mean, if those continents will further develop, they need to do it in a different way. They need to make a leapfrog on that one and develop their nutritional products in a different way. I would also like to stimulate collaboration between multinationals and startups. I would like multinationals to take the responsibility also to help startups in this field. Sometimes even they create an inconvenient situation for the multinationals at the same moment. So be it. That's healthy. That's healthy for any disruption of system which we need to have. And that means also we need to collaborate in a chain. If you see the products which are fermentation-based, like algae or like fungi or molds or whatever, they need also some raw materials. And can other big multinational companies not help them getting in an affordable way the right healthy raw materials on this one? So all kinds of partnerships and collaborations also over the value chain are needed. Last but not least, we also need a mindset change with consumers. Consumers that throw away a lot of the food, consumers who buy from a supply chain that throws away already from the beginning of the whole supply chain a lot of our agricultural products. Some of the agricultural products, which are great input for other products, we call waste. Really? Is it all waste? I don't think so. It depends on how you develop your whole supply chain, and also in this respect, to a more circular economy, which I strongly believe in. So I started my short introduction that I would like to use my time, my effort, my context, my influence to develop this alternative protein market. And therefore it is accessible also for all of you. So via GFI, feel free if you need my or the group I have set up help, next to, of course, the help of GFI. I would like to put my effort into this. I started by saying, is the food system not a little bit or quite a bit broken? If I look to health, if I look to climate, if I look to waste, if I look to hungry people, are there alternative technologies that we can boost and make the consumer aware, develop the technologies, take care that the investment money is there? Yes. Should we collaborate then with all those parties and with the big multinational companies? Yes. I think we should do that. I think it's possible to do that and to create, call it a revolution into the food market, which is, in my opinion, very much necessary. Thank you, by the way, Bruce Hein, for your comments. I agree with your comment in the chat. And I think we need these kind of thoughts, this kind of input to change the system, which is very, very necessary, but lucky enough, very, very possible also. With that, Marika, I would like to hand over back to you. And I'm very glad that GFI even exists. I'm very glad that you put in the LINC system. By the way, in the beginning, when I started helping all those startup companies, I said, I will help your colleague also. And people said, no, only me. I said, no, I help your colleague also. I said, listen, you all need to collaborate in this field. Let me do that. And let me, not in that niche, kill each other, but let's team up in that niche and change the big meat market. That is what we should do. And now I'm doing that more and more with companies, and they see the benefit of that. And I appreciate that. And that is also a role with LINC that you can play as GFI. My full support to this. Marika, back to you.
Thank you so much, Feike. Thanks for grounding us in the reality of our current food systems, and also for your inspiring words about the importance of collaborating with one another to really ensure the success of this life-saving and world-saving industry. So now I'll pass things over to GFI Europe's Corporate Engagement Manager, Carlotta Lucas, who will provide a brief introduction to the topic of the day, which is enhancing plant-based products with cultivated and fermentation technologies. And then we'll dive into the panel discussion.
Thank you, Marika. Hi all, it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. So indeed, as Marika says, today the topic of the day is how are we improving plant-based products, or how can we improve plant-based products using new fermentation and cultivated technologies? And the reason we're thinking about that is, and I think as everyone is aware, study after study shows that the most important driving factor for consumer purchase and consumption is taste. And although many plant-based products are starting to inch towards taste parity, we're still a ways away. So if we dive a little bit more into that and look into what are kind of the three key taste barriers, there's three things that come up that are still kind of big challenges if we look specifically at plant-based meat. First, from a moisture perspective, products are often dry, they lack the juiciness, flavor, there's off flavors, a beany taste, and finally texture. Often products are too uniform, they don't have that initial great bite that consumers are looking for. So I know we're all working on this, we're focused on this, looking at this, but luckily what we're seeing kind of popping up now is new ingredients that are really working to address these kind of functional and sensory challenges. Whether it's new alternative fats, either produced via fermentation or cultivation, that don't seep out of the burger and therefore improve the flavor and the mouthfeel, new animal-free proteins like egg whites or dairy proteins that possess the exact same taste and properties as their conventional counterparts, or really functional ingredients that kind of improve the cooking experience and properties such as gelling, solubility, emulsification. And with these new types of ingredients, we expect that hybrid products will become more common because these technologies can really reinforce each other and help us bring together the best of all worlds, really. But to make this happen, we're going to need to see new partnerships and collaborations between ingredient suppliers and manufacturers. And that's why I'm really thrilled to be joined today by three fantastic panelists who are going to share a little bit more of their perspective on this new ingredient market, the opportunities, what considerations there are. So with that, I would like to bring to the floor Sachin Ajith, Director of Commercialization at Mission Barnes, Cesar Vega, VP of Food Design at Motif Foodworks, and Ram Nair, CEO of Mycorrhiza. So before we jump into our discussion, I'd love to give you each a minute to introduce yourself and your company. So Sachin, maybe if you could start, that would be wonderful.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me here. Truly an honor to be here. I'm Sachin Ajith. I'm the Director of Commercialization at Mission Barnes. And Mission Barnes is a cultivated fat company. We basically use cellular agriculture to take a small biopsy of an animal and grow that into the juicy fat that we all love to incorporate into our food. Company's been around for about 4 years. We're based out of San Francisco. And my background, I've been mostly a food entrepreneur, started up a couple companies, the last one being a plant-based cheese company. So it's been quite an interesting transition being in this space and meeting everybody.
Fantastic. Cesar?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. And also an honor to be here in the kickoff of your initiative. And I truly also commune with the collaboration spirit that it's aiming to deliver. So happy to contribute. So yes, my name is Cesar Vega. I am the Vice President of Food Design at Motif Foodworks. Motif is an enterprise that aims to improve on the promise of plant-based foods by making these foods even craveable for consumers. And we help the industry by delivering food technologies or finished food forms that again, deliver a more pleasurable experience overall. We do this by pioneering breakthrough approaches to food science, design, and the culinary arts. And we try to push the boundaries of what plant-based foods can be. So, and that is reflected in our rich pipeline. And but again, always with those benefits that Faika was earlier alluding to, a better planet, better health for all. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful.
Hey, thank you for the opportunity, GFI. It's nice to be here. My name is Ram. I'm the founder and CEO of Mycorrhiza. Personally, I have a background in fermentation engineering with filamentous fungi and started the company after my PhD in 2017, now with the company from the start. And what we do at Mycorrhiza, we are actually a fungi fermentation company. So the heart of the technology is basically fermentation. And right now we are more focused on creating mycoprotein as an ingredient for food companies, which want to use it as an ingredient for vegan products. We are also building a technology platform more for diversified products, like you mentioned about the cultivated fat. That's one of the things that we are working on. So we have a diversified R&D approach towards using fungi technology as a base for food fermentation and the future of food. And we are based in Sweden, and growing up in the team, we are now 35 people. Our ambition is to grow much faster and be one of the world leader in fungi technology. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, it's a pleasure to have you all here, and thank you for your time. So we're going to dive deep into the content over the next 30 minutes. I would just like to say to everyone in the audience, please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. We're going to spend about 10 minutes or so at the end discussing those. So please do feel free to do that. So to start off, I already originally mentioned that from consumer studies, it's clear that plant-based ingredients are not always able to provide kind of the right taste and functionality that consumers are looking for. So I'd love to understand from you guys, what are the biggest formulation challenges you're hearing about from consumers? And maybe Cesar, you could kick us off.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that you hit the nail on the head with all those three elements of moisture, flavor, and texture. I think that when we hear the same, right? We hear the same, almost independent of application. It could be a burger analog, a sausage, or a nugget. All these three manifestations or three dimensions of the manifestation are always at play. And it's just the balancing act that we have to think about in how we design the foods. So to that end, I think that what we try to engage our customers in is thinking about beyond the functional aspect of the ingredient and contextualize it in the overall experience that consumers go through when eating plant-based foods. So in that sense, it's not only about, is it juicy, but it's also about, how it bites. Is it mushy? It's mushy and it's juicy. So what would consumers prefer? Like, there are trade-offs in that experience, right? When you think about the reference points of, let's say, a burger, you end up with a burger or start with a burger. There is something about how it loses moisture, how it bleeds out, all these signifiers that people are looking for that are also part of, again, that eating experience. There are externalities to it. So I think that that's the challenge. It's like that interactivity of different signifiers and attributes, and what we believe can benefit us as an industry is, do we really understand what's more important relative to other experiences? Texture over taste or aroma, all these kind of things. So we have a fantastic task to solve for. So and we at Motif live at the interface of all these manifestations. We provide solutions regardless of what the problem is. We believe that there are problems to be solved, and we are agnostic to what the problem is and what the solution can be. So it makes it a lot more fun, but also a lot more complex.
What about you, Sachin? Does that resonate what Cesar just shared, or what are you hearing from your customers about kind of the challenges they're currently facing? Oh, and I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, I agree with Cesar here. I think resoundingly everyone that we speak to, the ones that have switched to a plant-based diet or are, mostly eating the plant-based, they always talk about the meat being, the alternative meats not being juicy enough, the texture, the mouthfeel. And, we are trying to solve that exact same problem. Which is by just creating the animal fat that has been missing from those products. And you mentioned a hybrid product. I mean, that's exactly what we will be seeing initially. And I think it's a lot easier for consumers to understand, having a small amount of cultivated material and mostly plant-based proteins in the product. So yeah, I agree that there's going to be a lot of solutions. Certainly, this is one of them that's hopefully going to solve that problem.
Fantastic. So talking about kind of different types of fat, so Chin, I know there's you and others are working on cultivated fat. I know Karina has also been developing fat via yeast. Could you maybe share a little bit more about that? Or yeah, what are different ways we can think about addressing this fat challenge?
Yeah, sure. I mean, from our perspective, we basically create fungi-based fat that is like originally from the fungi mixed with the plant-based solutions. What we see as a challenge for most food companies is like they are very much dependent on the fully plant-based fat alternatives at the moment. And that's when, as you know, like it's not so juicy enough and it melts when you're heating up the patties. So these is a challenge that we already see that with companies that we are already working on, and they want to see something that is very much mimicking towards animal side of fat, which is what consumers are quite used to. And the challenge we are addressing is basically how can we bring it from a perspective of like not going into like the novel food challenge, because that's what the biggest factor when it comes to like alternate fat at the moment, because most of this yeast cells, as you mentioned, is like will be GMO grade. So, and especially in Europe, it's very much regulated as well. So even we have like friends in the industry who are struggling with that challenge. So what we have developed is like in the process where the fungi, which is kind of already in the system, could be used for creating that fat molecules, and then we can add it to the existing portfolio of products. And we are already testing that with few companies in a beta version, basically. And our ambition is to actually scale it up quite fast, so that opportunity is much more available for all the companies.
Fantastic, thank you. Beyond alternative fats, there's obviously also different categories of new ingredients that we're seeing popping up, the new types of proteins and functional ingredients. Cesar, would you be able to share a little bit more about kind of where you guys are focusing, or the types of proteins that you're seeing or finding interesting and impactful?
Yeah, at Motif, as I was saying, I think we are looking at different moments of the experience and what are the relevant solutions we can provide. And one of them, we believe, is solved by our first offering in the market, which is Hemami. Hemami provides a real meaty flavor and aroma to different plant-based analog foods like burgers or sausages, to say an example. And Hemami is basically no different than heme protein that you typically eat in beef, but without the animal, right? Which is all about the promise of plant-based and sustainable foods. So, with that incursion into the marketplace, again, we are committed to advanced food technologies that, again, solve for relevant problems. In this case, is aroma, taste, and appearance as well. So we have a pipeline of initiatives that are trying to continue to leverage precision fermentation as a means to produce them. And we're trying to focus on a specific functionality. So, for example, you can think of dairy proteins. So dairy proteins are, it's a group of different types of proteins that have in conjunction together a functionality, but when you put them aside, when you split them apart, they can have differentiated functionality. So we're trying to understand, how that functionality works better or not in different applications, depending on the protein, in order to then develop specific programs to develop strains that express them, right? One of the things that, I would like to emphasize in terms of the journey of our industry, in terms of developing these alternative sources of protein, through precision fermentation, is that we try to focus, or our approach is trying to focus again on the experience we want to deliver, and then go back and understand really what is then let's call it the molecule we want to create, right? So, so that's the journey that we are at. The number of proteins that are out there in nature is infinite. It's just about, which one do we really want to choose? Which one can solve the most relevant problem, right? And that's the journey that we're at. So, but here again, our first manifestation in the marketplace is Hemami.
Fantastic. Then I'd love to switch the conversation a little bit to think about also how food manufacturers can incorporate these kind of new innovative ingredients in their processing and introduce them to consumers. So how does a cultivated or a fermentation-derived fat or protein impact processing and formulation, and does it actually impact the processing? Maybe Sachin, if you could share some thoughts there.
Yeah, food manufacturing. This is an interesting question because when we were doing benchtop prototypes prior to doing full commercial tests, we kind of had an idea that the fat would perform differently compared to, say, a palm fat or a coconut oil. But when we actually partner with a sausage company locally to start manufacturing our Mission Barnes line of chorizo, and what the surprising thing was how much positive impact it had in binding the ingredients together and keeping it moist for and juicy for longer. When we first approached this manufacturer, they were very skeptical. They were talking of bringing a novel ingredient into their BRC audited facility. I mean, this was something that they were really hesitant to do. But once we brought in the fat, we ran it through the equipment. It just worked. We didn't have to make any major modifications, and it had a very positive impact on the finished product. And then once the product was cooked, I mean, again, the juiciness. The surprising thing was the aroma had very distinct animal-like characteristics. The flavor was also very animal-like. So it's very promising. At least the early results are very promising in terms of how it can positively affect the manufacturing process.
Thanks, Sachin. And Ram, you were mentioning that Mycorrhiza is kind of working on a new technology platform, maybe to think about how to bring these types of ingredients together. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, I mean, going back to what Vicky was mentioning in the beginning, how can we use untapped resources from the existing food industry? I mean, if you look at any food manufacturing company, there is a lot of sugar-based resources that are otherwise going into waste streams. So we have started off a technology platform that we call TechMake, where we can actually work with companies, to utilize that resources to grow our fungi and the product that comes out of it, whether the protein or maybe the future fat that could be used as an additional resource for those food companies. We have received an EU grant for it. So European Union has given us a technology verification grant. So we are working on a small pilot scale for it now. I mean, now the question is whether the industry is ready for it now. it's another topic of discussion. But at the same time, we believe maybe in 5 to 10 year scale, that would be something that we can really scale in a larger system where, in collaboration with other larger food companies. So this is what we are doing now.
That's great. And then in terms of labeling and kind of introducing these ingredients to consumers and the types of product claims you can make, Cesar, what has your experience been with that so far? Are there special considerations?
Yes, and I think that it is a very interesting question, because it just speaks about the last 20 years where the food industry is evolving in terms of not only the technologies that we use to produce food, but also on the substrates we use to make food. And prior to in precision fermentation, prior to this, you can have examples of insects, for example. We high sources of protein, alternative source of protein, highly sustainable. But how do you regulate, insect content in food? Or how do manufacturers, to your point earlier, hey, I want to make cookies with these ingredients? Well, is that allowed in manufacturing facilities? So even though they are considered safe for consumption, there are a lot of developments in the regulatory space that the industry needs to also go for. And we are all going to go through those journeys, either it's fat or protein or you name it. It's because we are redefining what food is or could be, right? So in our case, we have been successful in obtaining a GRAS a letter of no questions for Hemami. Based on its method of production, Hemami could be labeled myoglobin or natural flavor. Yeah, and all the labeling regulations capture how this naming will be supported. So there is a framework that allows us to, go there, and with the support of FDA, we've been able to, proceed. And we have also added to this GRAS letter a petition for color additive as a coloring ingredient, because by means of its properties, it's basically the myoglobin that provides this red hue to meat. Well, it can also provide the benefit of appearance, as I was telling you earlier. So lots for the industry to solve, but I think that what we have learned through our journey is also partnering with governmental institutions. It's key for us. There is a lot of education that has to happen back and forth from both ends, and we just need to continue holding hands as an industry. Our aim is the same, and the government also wants to do something about this, and I think that it just takes time, but we will get there.
The situation in the United States and in Europe is a little bit different. If you think about labeling and consumer claims, kind of what's your perspective right now?
I mean, we did a consumer launch to figure out what is the consumer demand requirement from the food companies and such. And what majority of the output that we get was like people are more leaning towards clean label products, having very much of lesser ingredients in the list. And that's one thing that we also learned when we are working with like food manufacturing companies. I mean, in our case, we are an ingredient company, so our major customers are basically food producers. And that's what we are hearing from them. Like all the consumers want to go more towards very much less of an ingredients list. And if you go back to what Cesar was mentioning before, like the texture and also like the mushy appearance of the product, all of these is actually masked by the huge list of ingredients that basically like the plant-based companies are now using. And that is where we can come in with our mycoprotein being a highly texturized product. It could be reducing that list of ingredients. And that is the biggest sales pitch that we have to all these food manufacturing companies, and coming back with the hybrid approach where we're not asking them to replace products, rather we could add 10-20% of a mycoprotein, and then suddenly you have an increased texture or a bit of an umami taste, aftertaste that most likely people would like to have. So those are the things that we are pitching, and that's what we are also seeing from the industry together with the consumer approach as well.
Sachin, have you or in Mission Barnes done any kind of consumer research studies around consumer kind of acceptance and openness to cultivated ingredients, and what have you kind of heard so far?
Yeah, we've done some preliminary studies on consumer acceptance, and I think the resounding answer is there's a lot of education that still needs to be done. Most people aren't even aware of, at least in our case, what cultivated means or what's cultured, and so it's important that especially for our marketing team, that we're, rather than marketing this as a traditional food, we've taken the approach of like, we do have a huge education piece along with marketing and brand building, right? So consumers are open to alternatives. They know what's missing, but they're also reluctant to dive into something that is made in a lab, so to speak, right? So it's important for us as an industry to stay away from that, the lab terminology. Consumers don't want to eat science; they want to eat food. So it's important to stick with that the food descriptions, consumers are open, especially in the U.S. and Singapore and in several parts of the world. We saw increased openness to trying these types of products, especially if it actually does solve some of the challenges that they're having today. But again, I go back to, there's going to be a huge education piece.
Absolutely. All right, I'd love to spend the last 5 minutes or so of this initial part of the panel talking more about scaling the industry, because I think we all know that the success of many of these ingredients will be directly correlated to costs and to scale. So would be actually curious to hear from all of you, at what scale are your products being produced right now? Can you start to supply large food manufacturers? Maybe I'll start with you.
Okay, yes, we are actually scaling. We currently have a demo facility in Gothenburg. We produce about 100 tons of microprotein every year, and we are also building a greenfield factory in Sweden, and that's like 5,000 tons. It's still small volumes. It sounds like big, but if you look at the overall food industry demand, it is still a small volume. And as you rightly mentioned, scale is one of the biggest factor that is limiting at the moment, because we have consumers willing to buy it, and we have companies and industry willing to accept the change, but we still have limitations in the scale. And luckily for us, we are on the right track of building it up bigger, but we at the same time also feel that it's a collective mission to create a segment. We need a lot of companies scaling at the same time. That's what we are looking forward to, and also bringing collaborations with other food companies, like going back to what Vicky mentioned in the beginning, like larger food companies who has a facility maybe could host also small startups, where building a collaboration network together with large companies could be a good option to rightly scale it and reduce the time that most of our companies of our size need to go through otherwise to go to the market. So with a corporation effect, maybe that go-to-market scalability time could be reduced.
Cesar, how is Motif Foodworks looking at scaling up?
Yeah, I think that we're trying to be as resourceful as possible. Our Hemami is done by precision fermentation, right? And I think we all know that precision fermentation capacity globally is very scarce. So we have forged very powerful partnerships with a co-manufacturer. And we are at a place where we could manage servicing large customers. So, but we are also about to open market development unit here in Boston that will help us further down our part of our pipeline in terms of ingredients, as well as our finished product portfolio, and we call it the plant-based. So it's it was a very clever name, that grown here in the company. But and I think that to Ram's point earlier it's a very tough place to be for us in again emerging new food solutions that are going to take a long time to be adopted. So I think we need to be also very cognizant of that. Food is one of those delicate things that you think 2 or 3 times before ingesting, right? It's not like a shampoo, or it's not like a perfume. It's something that is internalized. So what I would encourage us to think about, and collectively as well, is how do we change the paradigm of price to one of added value? And how do we also make sense of the anthropological experiment? Because to me, this is a humongous anthropological experiment. We literally have to put our mouth where the money is, right? Like, is that all these benefits for us, for the planet, for animals, that important that we're willing to subsidize it, let's call it that way, as consumers? And how does the narrative collectively as an industry, what that narrative needs to be in order to be more compelling and appealing, while we also commit ourselves in delivering the experiences that consumers are expecting, right? It's not just words. You have to deliver on an experience priced at the level of satisfaction of the experience, right? So I think that's I see that it's a marathon that has 2 tracks. We need to get better at scaling up to benefit from that reduction in costs, and we need to embrace as consumers also the added value and the bigger purpose that these foods are aiming to deliver, and then meet in the middle where everybody wins to make it sustainable also from a financial perspective.
Maybe building off of your remarks, Cesar, Sachin, if you're kind of combining the scaling and the price question, how are you seeing these kind of new types of ingredients compare in price maybe to kind of their plant-based proteins and fats? And how do you see that becoming sustainable or an option?
The biggest thing you hear about the cultivated meat industry in general is how expensive it really is to grow. So for our founder and CEO, Eitan, from day one, his focus was on growing fat for the very reason because fat is easier to grow. It's 20 times faster than muscle cells, and it is a lot cheaper. Nonetheless, today, the price point is still higher than what a consumer would expect to pay on the shelf. We are in a pilot facility today in San Francisco. It was really to show proof of concept that we could scale this. And we have taken these ingredients, the fat, and successfully incorporated into products. So our goal is to scale rapidly into a commercial facility shortly. As everybody knows, I mean, nobody has received regulatory approval in the US today, and certainly not Europe. And Singapore has allowed one company to sell a limited amount of product, but we're all waiting for that regulatory approval to happen in order to rapidly scale this. So right now it's really hard to say where we're going to land on the price. I know for Mission Barns, we're focused on launching our own product line immediately as soon as we get regulatory approval. But it's going to be hard to say where the pricing is going to be. I do know right off the top that it's going to be slightly more expensive than the other plant-based items on the market shelf today.
Great. Then I'd love to wrap up this portion with one last question and kind of the whole theme of the day, the role of partnerships also in helping scale up. And Yoris already mentioned that you see kind of food manufacturers really being able to support in scaling up and providing their kind of production capacity as well. Is there any other types of partnerships that you're hoping to see or you think will be necessary kind of for this part of the sector to scale up and be successful?
From a Scandinavian perspective, it might be also the interest from the retail segment, because that's one thing that we see, that the retail segment is still not matured enough to actually host, plant-based movement, and that's already happening in the industry. And that is something that we are actually working on at the moment now, working together with like big grocery chains. Now we have collaborations with ICA, for instance, is one of the biggest in Scandinavia. And that is something that we also see that maybe we'll need an additional push from all the plant-based vegan companies, and also the industry in general needs to align the traditional retail segment also to join the momentum.
Wonderful. Sachin, what about you? What type of partnerships do you think will be essential for this sector?
We're looking at partnerships in many different ways. There's obviously a supply chain partnership that's very useful, especially today. You want to lock in your supply chain, and you want to have partners that really understand, the entire chain from all the ingredients all the way to the finished product, packaging, everything. But there's also the partnership of, we're open to, kind of a licensing partnership, because there are companies, like especially traditional food companies and meat companies, that have the distribution, they have the infrastructure, they have the manufacturing capability, they have the ties in with the retailers and the food service companies. So when you're ready to launch a product, it's nice to have that partnership already in place, so you can go to market rapidly. And there's also a certain amount of industry knowledge that we take for granted as startups, like, oh yeah, we'll figure it out. I can tell you from experience that it's not as simple to just launch a product and make it successful on the shelf. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of support. There's a lot of hidden levers, so to speak, in play to make something successful on a retail shelf or in food service. And it's great to have those kinds of partnerships, when you're ready to launch in the market. So we're open to different types of partnerships. Obviously, we are going to have our own branded launch, but we have been speaking to other companies, especially because we're trying to replace regular meat. It's not just, we're not competing with the plant-based foods on the shelf. It's important for us that we partner with people that really know that category.
Cesar, any final thoughts from you?
Well, I think that Sachin and Ram were very comprehensive. I think that the only thing that I can add are two things: is partnerships with those entities that are for cultivating the next generation. It's like, how do we, engage with, let's call it universities, high schools, because, I don't consider myself old by any means of the imagination, but, I'm a generation past the ones that are going to make the biggest effect, right? So the thing is, how do we engage with them? How do we learn from them, right? So the partnership with the think tanks in that area, I think, are going to be very important. And the other one is, I think, one tangible thing that Sachin was talking about in terms of it's a lot easier said than done. It's not just put me on the shelf. It's like, we're on the shelf, next to whom, there are a lot of questions there, right? But also the brands that, are willing to carry your message or carry the purpose that you have, justifiably so. Big brands have reservations in protecting brand equity. So I get it. So I think there are a lot of partners out there that are willing to help you incubate brands, right, with limited risk, but that also embrace the pioneering aspect of what we're trying to do. So I think that's an area where we need to go and look deeper, as a means to, create this appeal that also big brands may not have just because of legacy. So it's a very complex jungle out there, right? But I think that there are a lot of different means by which, again, we can keep pushing the industry forward.
Fantastic. Then I'd like to use the next 5 minutes or so to answer any questions we got in the chat. Molly, I think you've been keeping track of them. Could you share any questions we received?
Yes, absolutely. And everyone can feel free to continue submitting questions. You're welcome to paste them in the chat or message one of us individually. So first question comes from Willem. So he asks what the effect of these ingredients, for example, fats, would be on the Nutri-Score or nutrition label, and specifically compared to fully animal-based products.
Anyone feel comfortable answering that question?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question? I just missed it.
Sure, yeah. So Willem asked what the effects of these ingredients, particularly fats, I assume it depends quite a bit based on the ingredient and based on the product, but generally sort of what the impact would be on the nutrition label compared to an animal-based product.
It was actually pretty similar. When we did a full nutritional analysis, I mean, the fats are pretty equivalent. I think we had less cholesterol, maybe slightly healthier in that sense. But at the end of the day, we're trying to create an equivalent fat that performs the same way. So there was not much of a difference.
Awesome. Thank you. So next question is for Sachin as well, but other panelists can feel free to weigh in. So you mentioned that there's an education piece needed for cultivated meat products. Do you have any idea how to go about that education? And of course, there's role for individual brands to market their own products, but it also seems like maybe this is an opportunity for wider collaboration. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a long process, and we're just at the beginning of it. But messaging is really important. I think we have to control as the alternative protein industry, or the there's a novel industry. We have to make sure that we get ahead of it rather than allowing some of the more vocal elements to take over and label it. There are plenty of industries out there that are trying to call it Franken meat or fake meat or lab meat, and it's important that we come out and we really explain what this is. For us, we're not opposed to GM ingredients, but it was clear that for the consumer it was really important that they were reluctant to consume something that was genetically modified. So we kept our cell lines non-GM the entire process. So those kinds of things are important, and you can even from the very beginning you can make sure that you don't do some of the things that are not friendly for the consumers. And then from a marketing standpoint, we get out there and we make sure that we explain the whole process and show them that this is still a natural product. It's still grown the same way. We still take an animal cell and expose it to the same nutrients that it would find in the animal's body. So there's nothing different about it other than the fact that it was just grown without slaughtering an animal, right? And that's going to be important. Even when we're partnering with the retailers, it's not like you can just send something off to the retail shelf and expect it to do well. Like there's going to have to be a partnership element that there's some extra work to be put in to make sure that the consumer gets the information they're supposed to get.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's maybe all the time we have for questions today. Well, I see a good question in the chat, but maybe that can be discussed in the networking session as well. So Cesar and Sachin, I really want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And I'm going to pass over to Marika for some final comments.
Yes, thank you so much to our phenomenal panelists and Carlotta and Molly. That was such a fascinating and in-depth discussion, and I apologize for cutting 1 minute into your networking time. But before we sign off Zoom and into Meetaway, and if Molly or Carlotta, one of you doesn't mind popping that link in the chat. As I mentioned, after today's seminar, you'll get an email with a link to the recording, feedback survey, and you'll also get an invitation to our next seminar, which will take place on September 20th. And the topic will be mitigating plant-based protein supply and processing constraints. So now we'll send you off to networking. Essentially, you're going to just click on this link, which we've pasted in the chat. All you need to do is follow the prompts and you'll be paired with a new person every 5 minutes. You'll have the option to extend your time if you're having a particularly robust conversation. On the home screen, you can also select who you would like to meet or who you would like to not meet with, if maybe you're very familiar with a couple folks and want to spend the time meeting new folks. And as I mentioned, and there's also an opportunity, you can take notes and share your contact info with others. And after the networking session, you'll receive this awesome card with all of your notes and the emails of the folks you connected with. So thank you so much to our panelists, our keynote, my GFI colleagues, and everyone for joining and participating in today's event. And happy networking. We'll see you in September.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.